Hello, I hope you're all safe and well. I'm Alice, the General Manager of the MIA. Today, I'm bringing you another question and answer session to help you in your business to navigate through the coronavirus pandemic. You might have seen some of our previous webinars on HR and employment law, furlough leave, general business guidance for our industry, and health and well-being during COVID-19. Thanks so much for all of your positive feedback on them. These are all still available to watch if you'd like to on the MIA website. We've got a webinar box on the homepage. You can also take a look at our COVID-19 page, which is updated daily with the latest articles, videos and guidance, especially for the MI industry. So today, the subject of our webinar is something a bit different. It's intellectual property. So the MIA partners with Briffa, who are leading intellectual property lawyers for the creative industries. As this global crisis is changing from a short to a long-term issue, businesses are starting to prepare for the new normal, which is a phrase that you've probably heard quite a lot. For some, this might involve quite a major pivot in product offerings or target consumers. So throughout all of this, it's important to make sure that your IP protection doesn't get left behind. So to answer some questions on how best to ensure the protection of your intellectual property, I'm delighted to be joined by Joshua, who is an associate at Briffa. Josh advises on all areas of intellectual property law. He specialises in clients from the creative industries and music in particular. I'm sure he won't mind me saying that outside of work, he's involved in a number of music-related projects. He's a musician himself, a producer and a DJ, so he definitely knows and understands our world, which is really helpful. Hi, Josh.
Hi there.
So let's get started. I've got some questions for you. So first of all, how can I best use this time to check that I've got my intellectual property in order?
Thanks, Alice. Yeah, I mean, intellectual property is something that often gets overlooked by some businesses, even though often you don't even realize how important it is. And some businesses, especially a lot of manufacturers and of musical instruments, are built on a foundation of intellectual property. And so it's important to give it the time to really think about it, to identify. That's what we always say is the first important step, is to identify what intellectual property you as a business are creating and what the value is to your business and what the importance is. And so, often it's easy to get carried away in your business and doing all the other stuff. And it's hard to kind of stop and take a break to look and think about these things. And this is probably a good opportunity to really stop and think, okay, what am I doing that nobody else does? What do I do differently to other people? And what would the consequence be on me and my business if somebody started copying that without giving me credit, without paying me for it, and just looked at my business and started picking apart those key things that I do differently and started copying them? And that really is at the heart of intellectual property, is making sure that when you have created something unique, when you're doing something differently and in a unique way to you and your business, you want to be able to protect that and keep that reputation and all of the consequence of that to yourself. Now, that applies obviously to all of your members who are manufacturing and making instruments. For those of your members who are stores and who are retailers of musical instruments, you are also, it's important to have an understanding of intellectual property, because you are using the brands that of all the products that you're selling, you are using those to promote the products, and you need to make sure that you are doing it in the right way, and that you are doing it in a way that A, doesn't infringe any rights, B, that maybe working together with the brands maximizes the impact of this intellectual property. So it's always good, whatever it is you're doing within the music industry, it's always important and good to have a good understanding of those things. So the first step, I guess, is to think about it and maybe do some reading. But I guess the easy answer and the lazy answer is speak to somebody. As you mentioned, Alice, we work closely with the MIA, so we're always happy to offer that free service to your members, just to have what we call a free health check, just to kind of or an IP workout or an IP MOT, whatever you want to call it, just to kind of chat to your members, go through it and see what there is. and answer any questions you might have. So that's probably the easy way to just get a bit of an overview.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So is now a good time to file a trademark? Has COVID affected the registration process at all?
So it's an interesting question, because trademarks are really important to any business, really, whether you're a retailer or a manufacturer or anything else. It's always a good thing to have filed your key brand identifier, so whether it's your name or a name of a range of products, so that you've got exclusivity to that. Now, when you file a trademark, as you may know, there's an opposition period, which means that other people can, if they think they own a similar or identical mark, they can try to stop you from getting your mark. And so there are two schools of thought at the moment. One, which is to say that now is a good time to file a mark, because fewer businesses are looking too closely at it. So if you think, or if we think there's a bit of a risk that somebody might oppose it, now is probably a good time to sneak it in, because nobody wants to have a fight about this at the minute, understandably. The one thing to note, though, is that the UK Intellectual Property Office, and in fact the EU Intellectual Property Office, and a few others around the world, have put a bit of a pause on a lot of these deadlines. So even though, yes, it's a good time because there's probably less scrutiny on some of these filings, some of the deadlines have been frozen for now, which means A, potential delays, even though from what we've seen, it all kind of goes smoothly enough, but B, there will probably be a chance to oppose later on. However, just as a general rule of thumb, we would always say file as early as possible. So if you're sitting on, if you're sitting on some brand identifiers, you have any questions about it, if you have time to think about it, it's probably a good time anyway, at least to start the conversation and to get an idea of cost. Costs are relatively limited for UK marks anyway, so it's always a good thing to start having that conversation now.
Great. Okay, so the next one is about online business. So for a lot of our music shops in particular, they've had to close. So some of them have seen they would ordinarily maybe do about 10% of business online, and they're now doing 100% of business online. So the question is, if I was considering moving most of my business online, what are the risks of doing so, and what can I do to limit them?
Right. It is an interesting one, because obviously a lot of businesses are already partially set up for online retail, but as you mentioned, it's now becoming, the 100% or very close to. I guess the big things to look at really are the terms and conditions. I think that's sort of the top one to look at. The terms and conditions form the contractual relationship between you and anyone who buys goods. And the reason it's so important for online retail is that there are different consumer protection rules and regulations that apply if you are buying as a consumer, if you're buying stuff online, as opposed to buying stuff in a store. And so as a retailer, it's always good to begin with, to have a good understanding of what those rules are. Things like, a right to change your mind, and that people might expect a full refund within a certain amount of time. But obviously, and this is something that I get asked a lot, is, people say, well, this doesn't work for my business. If people did that with the products that I sell, I would go out of business. It just doesn't work. It doesn't make commercial sense. And if you just look at the rule book, if you look at it cold without trying to apply it to your business, you may have that impression. You may think, well, this just doesn't work for me, which is why it's always good to speak to somebody who may be able to show you ways in which you can maybe, either things don't apply to you, things like, for example, the rule that you can have a full refund within, if you just change your mind, doesn't apply to goods which have been personalized or made to measure.
Yes.
So if somebody wants an engraved product, for example, just to name one example, that right doesn't apply to them. And so there are some things which either just don't apply to you, and there are some measures that you can take to minimize that impact. So it's good to have an understanding of the rules which apply to online retail anyway. Your terms and conditions give you a large degree of protection as a retailer to your, to the consumer. So it's always, it's really that super important document, because as I said, it's the contractual relationship between you and your customer. So it's really important to make sure that that is fully up to speed, that you're comfortable, and that you're comfortable with it, that you understand it, and also that it reflects the way in which you do business, because sometimes things change, your products change, the services change. So it's always good to have a to have a look at that. Another thing that's important, I guess two more things that I wanted to mention. One is your reliance on third-party media. Now, when I say that, I mean, you're always, now that everything's online, it's really tempting to just kind of grab pictures and videos that you've seen across the internet, and like, oh, here's somebody on YouTube who's uploaded a video of him playing this guitar. I'm going to stick it on my website because I sell this guitar. That is to be approached with care. I know you and I have had conversations about things like using images on blog posts and things like that. I think we've got an article on the MIA blog at some point as well about that. It's important to really kind of understand who owns the copyright to whatever materials you're using, and whether you're allowed to use them or not. Just because it's up online doesn't mean that you're okay to use it, especially not for commercial use. So it's good to kind of to have that in mind when you're using stuff. Ideally, if you're given materials from a brand as marketing materials, usually that's fine. So that's one to look out for. Yeah. And then I guess it's sort of similar to the terms and conditions. Just thought I'd mention it. You may remember GDPR 2 years ago. At the time, it seemed like the big important thing. Now suddenly, it's sort of gone down the list, but it's still there. So you still need to have given some thought to your data protection policy. So that's your privacy policy, which sits right at the bottom of your website in the small print. You see it on most websites. It just needs to tick some boxes, and it needs to be compliant with the general data protection regulations. So all of those things are potentially going to come under closer scrutiny now that everything is moving online. And so it's a good idea just to make sure that you have looked at those, that they're all up to date, up to speed, and ready to go to take your business online at the moment.
That's brilliant. So I am going to ask a final question, which I think is quite an important one. So you mentioned just now terms and conditions, and I'm wondering, what should I look for in my contracts that I've got at the moment to see if there's anything that I can do to limit the damage of COVID disruption?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a variation of a question that we're obviously, as you can imagine, we're being asked a lot, and I know that you've done some stuff about force majeure, and it's obviously with a radical change in the world, really. A lot of contracts simply don't make sense anymore, and they are just difficult to enforce. And so one of the things that obviously is very tempting is to look through your agreements and to check whether you have a force majeure clause, which allows you to terminate the contract because you're no longer able to carry out your obligations due to causes outside of your control. So I guess that is the main one that that you're looking for. The first, the force majeure clause. Ideally, you want it to mention, pandemic and things like that. But again, that's something that we're happy to help with. If you have a contract, if your members have contracts that they kind of want somebody to look over, always happy to pick up the phone and just sort of go through that with them and see if there's anything there. In terms of, I guess one thing so people talk about that a lot. People talk about what is in my existing contracts now. Understandably, it is the big question. What people often don't discuss as much is what they need to do for their contracts going forward, and just making sure that if this ever, God forbid, if this ever happens again, if something similar happens again, to make sure that time around that you are prepared. So it's always worth thinking about, either force majeure clauses, or just things like early termination, early breach, what happens in the event of a breach. as you mentioned, I work a lot across the music industry as a whole. So I also act for artists and talent and management and things like that. And so the first thing that I always say to them when looking at a contract is, what happens if it all goes wrong and you want out? And how can you what would happen under the contract? Is there a clause that allows you to terminate the contract earlier than planned? The same thing applies to all of your members, where it's just worth having that thought process and maybe a conversation of saying, what if this particular material has become too expensive for me to be able to continue manufacturing this in this way? Or what happens if I'm no longer able to sell this product or stock this product for whatever reason? Is there a way in which I can get out of the contract? And so it's not necessarily in the form of a force majeure clause, but it's always good to have that sort of thought process when you're entering into a contract of thinking, this is the way things look now. In 3, 5, 10 years time, depending on the length of the contract, that may no longer be the case. And if that happens, do I have a way out that enables me to minimize the impact on my business? So always thinking about before entering into a contract.
Yeah, I think the situation we're in now can teach us a lot of lessons really about best practice going forward.
Well, hopefully, it has the potential to, definitely, and I think in a way what we're seeing a lot of is it is forcing a lot of businesses who are otherwise, very much bricks and mortar, very much, traditional businesses. It's forcing them to engage with the online scene. And it is obviously, it's terrible that all the stores are closing. It was terrible, what was happening on the high street before that anyway. But at least it's been a bit of a catalyst to show people that there is potential in embracing online tools. And if it's forcing people to do it, and hopefully in 6 months, 1, 2, 3 years time, when things have resumed to a new normal, hopefully the work that will have been done now to carry some stuff online will continue to be valuable and will continue to allow people to make money in a way that they had not necessarily embraced before. So hopefully, fertile ground for good stuff to come.
Yeah. Well, Josh, thank you so much for your time. That was absolutely brilliant.
Thanks for having me.
I'll put all the information that members need to contact Briffa in the description of this video. So members get special rates and deals with this wonderful firm. So you know where to go for your IP needs now, and you've met Josh, so that's great. I hope that everyone has enjoyed watching and that this has been useful for you. We plan to bring you these webinar sessions as often as you need them. So please let us know if there's any other subjects that you'd like to hear about, and we'll happily cover them for you. So all that's left to say is to stay safe, and please do get in touch if there's anything that the MIA or that Briffa can do to help. Thanks for watching. Bye.